Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Nuns. Today we're studying Hosea chapter 13. Let's get started.
Okay, so a long time ago, there was a preacher, and his name was R.G. Lee, L-E-E. And he preached a sermon called Payday Someday. So that sermon was about wicked King Ahab. Now, I say all that because the premise of the sermon was, wicked King Ahab had it all. His life was great. He had a lot of money, a lot of wealth. He had a wife. He had a kingdom. Everything was great. But he did not walk with the Lord. And so he was a very, very wicked man. As a matter of fact, Ahab was one of the kings of the Old Testament, that all other wickedness would be judged based on how wicked he was. And so if somebody was going to be judged, they would say something like, well, that guy's wicked, but he's not as bad as Ahab was. Or that guy was even more wicked than Ahab. And the story goes, Ahab got into a lot of trouble. And the premise of the sermon was, one day, payday is coming. So whatsoever a man sows, that will he also reap. So if you live a certain way for a long time, eventually that stuff's going to come back and it's going to bite you. Now, that's what this chapter is about. There's a payday one day. And so there was a time, look in verse number 1, when Ephraim spoke. Remember, Ephraim is a name for Israel. When Ephraim spoke trembling, he exalted himself in Israel. But when he offended through Baal worship, he died. Now, this is what this means. It means that there was a time in Israel's past that when they spoke, everybody listened. They had strength, they had power, they had influence, they had respect. And there was a time when they spoke, everybody paid attention. But that time has passed. And why has that time passed? Because the thing that gave them strength was not their money, not their charm, not their influence. The thing that gave them every blessing they had was God. And when they didn't walk with Him, then they didn't have that same kind of lifestyle. Now, sin, and look in verse 2, now they sin more and more. And they made for themselves molded images and idols of their silver according to their skill. All of it the work of a craftsman. So sin had destroyed their strength as a nation. And here's why. Here's what you ought to write down. It's that sin eats away at our character. Sin is not just something we do. Sin is something that infects who we are on the inside, and it poisons everything else. Now, John, as you read this chapter, what was your takeaway?
So the chapter is kind of about how if you worship idols, you will not go unpunished. Like most of the chapter or a lot of the chapter says, like it talks about ripping people open. I don't know why it's specifically ripping people open, but it gets the message across.
It does.
And so like the Israelites, they were worshiping idols. And so as Daddy said, they are like, they're not as strong and they are not going unpunished. And yeah.
Okay, so let's process through this a little bit. So how long had they been sinning? Was it just a few days, or has this been a long time coming?
A long time.
Okay. So when God says that he hides beside like a leopard or like a lion, he's laying in wait. So they've been sinning a long time, walking down this road of wickedness for a long time. When God is finally ready for judgment, does the lion attack and just take small little swipes over time, or is his attack sudden?
His attack is sudden.
Does he take small little nibbles, or does he gobble up?
Gobble up.
So when God finally judges his people, will it take forever, or is it going to happen quick?
It's going to happen quick.
So that's what that means. Now I want you to look in verse number 3. It says, therefore they shall be like the morning cloud. Well, what happens with the morning cloud?
It just gets swept away by the wind.
That's right. They don't call it the midday or afternoon cloud because it just kind of blows away. All right. So therefore they shall be like the morning cloud, like the early dew, like the morning dew that falls on. Mm-hmm. What eventually happens as the day goes on?
It melts and goes away.
Melts and goes away. And it says, and like the early dew that passes away, like chaff blown off the threshing floor. So chaff was like the pieces of the husks and all that fell off of their wheat when they were bringing in their crops, the seeds would stay on the ground because they're heavy, but the wind would blow and it would take the chaff away. So what it's saying is they think they're so strong, but all it's going to take is just a simple gust of wind to take them away. They are going to be carried away. Now we know they're carried away into exile. So all of these things are here for a moment and gone because the idols that they're seeking their strength from and that they're worshiping, they come to nothing. I want you to remember, here's what the psalmist says about idols. In Psalm 115, starting in verse 3, it says this, "But our God is in heaven. He does whatever he pleases. Their idols are silver and gold, the works of men's hands. So they have a mouth, but they cannot speak. They have eyes, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. They have noses, but they do not smell. They have hands, but they do not handle. They have feet, but they cannot walk. Nor do they mutter through their throat. For those who make them are like them, so everyone who trusts in them." So the idol and those who follow them are just empty shells. Mm-hmm. And so what he's saying is, in these trials, the Lord is going to discipline his people. Now, is it all doom and gloom? Never. Because look in verse 16. "I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from the power of death. O death, I will be your plagues. O grave, I will be your destruction." So a ray of hope, even in talk of judgment. If salvation is to come to these people, will it come from their idols or will it come from God?
It will come from God.
It will come from God. So in the short term, there would be judgment, but in the long term, there will be deliverance. And here's how you know. Because this verse in Hosea, chapter 13, verse 14, is used again in the New Testament. "O death, I will be your plagues. O grave, I will be your destruction." And if you turn to 1 Corinthians 15, here's what it says. Ready? "So when this corruptible," that's our bodies, "put on incorruption." So our bodies will die, but one day we'll get bodies that will live forever. Mm-hmm. Okay? So "we shall all be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory?" Well, listen, God is talking about defeating death, hell, and the grave. And Hosea's people are listening going, we know we're about to go into exile and judgment, but one day God is going to defeat the worst of enemies, death, hell, and the grave. Well, who does he do that through? Through Jesus. So they don't know it yet, but this is a promise that true deliverance won't just save their nation. True deliverance will save the world by saving their soul. All that God is preparing here for his people in order to judge their sin, he is also making a way for them to be saved by their sin. Here's the deal. Hosea's people had started to sin, and now they're on a sin cycle. They're sinning more and more and more. We need to look at our lives and figure out where sin is in our lives, and we need to repent and stop the cycle. So today, let's look at our lives and see where our sin is getting worse and worse and worse. And we need to give it to the Lord and ask him to forgive us and change us. All right? We'll see you tomorrow as we read. Bye.